Hey there, and welcome to another edition of The Explainer. Today, we are diving into something super fascinating, the often hidden, almost invisible ways our brains and our cultures handle multiple languages. If you've ever felt like your language skills don't perfectly fit into neat, tidy little boxes, well, you are in the exact right place. We are going to break down a really powerful concept that is fundamentally reshaping how we think about communication, identity, and education.
So think about this for a second. Have you ever started a sentence in one language and then just seamlessly finished it in another? Or maybe you've grabbed a perfectly descriptive word from your second language because, well, your first language just didn't have the exact right phrasing. If you're bilingual or multilingual, this blending probably feels incredibly common and just perfectly natural to you. Yet for a really long time, traditional education told us this was somehow wrong or even a sign of language deficiency. Today, we're going to explore exactly why that old way of thinking is just completely flawed. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. What is translanguaging? 2. History and linguistic debate. 3. Translanguaging in the real world. 4. The monolingual classroom problem. And 5. Translanguaging as a tool for social justice.
All right, starting with Section 1, what is translanguaging?
Basically, translanguaging, or translinguismo, is this incredibly fluid, dynamic process where multilingual speakers use their entire linguistic repertoire strategically to make meaning. Now, I want you to contrast this against the old-school idea of bilingualism. Historically, being bilingual was treated as something called double monolingualism. That's the idea that if you speak two languages, you effectively have a strict, impenetrable wall in your brain separating them, and you just operate as two separate monolingual people depending on the room you're in. Translanguaging absolutely shatters that wall. It recognizes that hybrid language use is a systematic, highly strategic, and sense-making process.
To put it simply, imagine your language skills not as two completely separate toolboxes that you have to constantly swap out, but as one massive shared toolbox. When a speaker is translanguaging, they're seamlessly reaching into that single toolbox and pulling out the absolute best tool for the job, totally regardless of which language society claims that tool belongs to. At the end of the day, it's all about maximizing your communicative potential.
Moving right along to Section 2, history and linguistic debate.
Let's step back and see how this actually builds across human history, because this isn't some new internet trend. Archaeological evidence of bilingual education actually dates back 4,000 to 5,000 years. We see it in the ancient Ebla library, and we even know ancient Roman aristocrats learned Greek right alongside their native Latin. But if you fast forward to the 1960s and 70s, language education became incredibly rigid. Second language pedagogy leaned heavily on these intense audiolingual drills, focusing strictly on form, syntax, and rote repetition, completely divorcing the language from actual natural use. It wasn't until the 1980s in Wales that a researcher named Sen Williams coined the Welsh term traciaethu to describe the deliberate practice of using both Welsh and English in a single lesson. His colleague Colin Baker later translated this into English as translanguaging.
Now, within linguistics itself, there's a fascinating debate about how this actually works inside our brains. You've probably heard the term code switching, right? Well, the dual competence model behind code switching assumes that a bilingual person has two separate, distinct linguistic systems that just occasionally overlap. But translanguaging operates on what's called the postmodernist unitary model. Postmodern linguists basically argue that the very idea of discrete languages is actually just a social and political invention. According to this unitary model, you don't have two overlapping systems at all. You only have one massive, integrated linguistic system, your own unique idiolect formed by all of your personal social interactions.
Okay, Section 3, Translanguaging in the Real World.
Let's move away from academic theory for a second and look at how this plays out in everyday life. Think about geographic and cultural hotspots. In places like Miami, Florida, Spanish and English don't just sit politely side by side, they completely merge. This interweaving creates entirely new, creative expressions, what researchers call a translingual space. And the amazing thing here is that this space is highly specific. The exact type of Spanglish spoken in Miami depends heavily on the specific Latin American dialects present in the area. It creates a linguistic environment where communication flows in a way that can only be fully understood by the people who share that specific, merged translingual space.
And get this, translanguaging isn't just about spoken words either. It is highly active in deaf culture, where the focus is really on total sensory accessibility. Imagine a mixed deaf and hearing family sitting at the dinner table. They might communicate using lip reading, vocal cues, spoken words, and sign language all at the exact same time. Deaf children naturally use a variation of both signed and spoken languages. Translanguaging in this context is incredibly unique because it incorporates visual and gestural modalities right alongside spoken and written ones to create a fully integrated 360-degree communication experience. We also see this beautifully expressed in literature. Immigrant and second-generation authors use translanguaging as this brilliant cultural and aesthetic device. Take a look at Janina Broski's novel Yo-Yo Boying. It masterfully blends Spanish, English, and New Yorkan dialects all together. It uses colloquialisms and pseudophonetic spelling to show this deep metalinguistic awareness of the space between languages. The language of the book itself literally becomes a reflection of cultural fluidity.
Now, what's really interesting about this next piece is the hard data. When schools actually embrace this natural way of communicating, the results are staggering. Look at the data from Wales. Back in 1987, only 24.6% of primary school students spoke Welsh. But after they introduced pedagogical translanguaging into Welsh bilingual classrooms, where students might say, read a text in Welsh, but then discuss it in English, or vice versa, it had a massive impact. By 2007, that number had surged to 36.5%. It turns out, using what you already know really helps you learn what you don't know.
Which brings us to Section 4, the monolingual classroom problem.
To really explore this problem, we are going to ground our discussion in a fantastic research paper by Manishita Hajrapande titled Translanguaging Pedagogy, a tool for social justice and equity in the language classroom. This paper just perfectly captures the tension between how students naturally use language and the rigid, often outdated rules historically enforced by traditional education systems.
Pandey highlights something known as the monolingual bias. Traditional language classrooms, especially those teaching dominant languages like English, often operate as these invisible but incredibly powerful hegemonic forces. They enforce a strict separation of languages, which essentially treats bilingualism as a deficiency. It's as if a student's native language is somehow a barrier to learning English, rather than an asset. By imposing rigid quote-unquote standard English norms, these classrooms create opaque boundaries that actually have a subtractive effect. They diminish a learner's true capabilities and, ultimately, they marginalize their cultural and linguistic identities. It basically tells the student, hey, leave a part of who you are at the door.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, a tool for social justice.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how teachers can flip the script. Pandey outlines actionable ways to incorporate pedagogical translanguaging into classrooms. For instance, in the pre-writing phase, students can brainstorm in their native language, or they can engage in collaborative peer dialogues bilingually. Teachers can bring in authentic materials. We're talking multilingual songs, films, cultural artifacts, rather than just those sterile, textbook-only inputs. And in assessment, students can be allowed to code mesh, utilizing their full linguistic repertoire to synthesize what they've learned. Actually, the best part of all this, the teacher doesn't even need to be bilingual. The teacher simply steps back from being the ultimate authority in the room and becomes a collaborative facilitator, leveraging the student's own incredibly diverse resources.
On a much broader scale, translanguaging plays a huge role in decolonizing language. Think about this. Right now, non-native English speakers outnumber native English speakers by a ratio of 3 to 1 globally. 3 to 1. By insisting on strict American or British standards, we are perpetuating destructive linguistic hierarchies. Embracing translanguaging means accepting diverse global varieties of English, like Indian English, Nigerian English, or Trinidadian English, as entirely legitimate. It disrupts invisible cultural power dynamics and recognizes that real international communication requires dynamic flexibility, not just rigid conformity to a single dialect.
So, the crucial point here is summarized perfectly by the spirit of scholars like Suresh Kanagaraja, who says, we should respect and value the linguistic and cultural peculiarities our students may display, rather than suppressing them. We have got to stop viewing language as a closed system of strict rules and start seeing it as an open, fluid, meaning-making process. The next time you hear someone seamlessly blend two languages, realize you are not hearing a mistake. You are hearing the incredible, dynamic power of the human brain maximizing its potential. I'll leave you with this to ponder. Are we truly ready to decolonize our language norms and embrace the reality of how the world actually speaks? Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.